told you this morning it's been 26 years since I first set foot in Malawi today, and we were talking about this over the lunch table, and come November it'll be 7 years since we left Malawi. And I can remember thinking over this period of 7 years, something has happened in this society that wasn't there before. Well, not that I can remember, or maybe I wasn't paying enough attention to it, because we become more and more aware of victory parades in our society. Maybe it was the case that sports teams weren't winning before we went away in 2013, and maybe since coming back the world's changed and we've got good at sport. And I'm longing for the day when in Annalong, I'll even accept Kilkeel, where the bus will go down and there you'll have Annalong Football Club, or you'll even have Ballyvey. We'll even include the Valley in all of this as well. Or maybe even the hockey club. And they'll be on that bus and they'll be celebrating through these towns and villages their great win of whatever trophy they have won in all of Northern Ireland. I wonder, will you be there to celebrate with them? Now, when I say Annalong, Ballyvey and the Valley on a bus, I don't mean all together. I don't think that would be a good parade particularly. But you've seen it, and I should warn you that for some of you, the next image will be disturbing because it's Liverpool's victory parade. Of course, we know what happened during that just a matter of weeks ago. But hundreds and thousands of people gather on streets around the world in victory parades to celebrate achievements, to feel that they're part of this, that their team has won and for the next year is the champion of whatever that may be. And of course here for Liverpool it was European Championships, but it could as well be Olympic teams returning to their countries with all of their medals. We've seen this in Dublin, we've seen this also in London with Olympic teams coming through. And they do honour the sports people, they do honour these achievements that none of us possibly could ever do or have. But they allow us as fans to feel part of this significant event. Now, victory parades, it turns out, have ancient origins, with one of the earliest known examples being the Roman triumphs, as parades were undertaken in ancient Rome. They looked very different, but they were elaborate public celebrations that honoured military commanders who achieved significant victories for the empire. And what would happen is the victorious general would parade through the streets of Rome with their army. And with them they would be displaying the spoils of war. And they'd be displaying their captives, celebrating their success with all of those who lived in Rome. And this tradition that started in the Roman Empire influenced many subsequent cultures' victory parades throughout history. And whenever you think back of our studies so far in both books of Samuel, we have seen great success for David. Indeed, even going back to 1 Samuel, we see the success for David, that he was someone within that society because he was recognized and honored. Now, not so much a parade, but in 1 Samuel 18 and verses 6 to 7, we're told not so much about any form of David celebrating through the streets, but recognition of what he had achieved against the Philistines. As they were coming home when David returned from striking down the Philistines, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, "Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s." These were men simply going home. But yet it was victory that was being acclaimed to David for what he had achieved for God's people. And this completely enraged Saul. And it began Saul's slippery slope into jealousy. See, Saul is no longer king now as we come to 2 Samuel chapter 6. And David has firmly established his rule over the entire kingdom. And this was recognized by all of the tribes being represented for his coronation. But it's actually now in the bringing of the ark of the Lord to Jerusalem that sparks a great celebration and victory parade for David and the people. Verse 15 of 2 Samuel chapter 6 told us this a few weeks ago. David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn. This was truly a great moment for the people. This was the final moment of being established as a nation. The land was secure. The borders were secure. It was now their place, that place of covenant promise. And now they could worship their God in peace, without fear of any other nation trying to come up against them. And so all the people are celebrating. But there's one person who's not rejoicing, and that is Michal. You see, for Michal, a window had once been a means of showing her love for David in 1 Samuel chapter 19 and verse 12. But here she is looking out of the window. Literally, the Greek is looked down from the window. And it tells us nothing but cold disdain for David. And of course, the language of the text tells us this because she is described not as David's wife, but as the daughter of Saul. And from that perspective, she sees not her husband, but King David leaping and dancing before the Lord in behavior that she believes is beneath royal dignity. And look at her response as her heart is opened to us in the text. And so as she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. Michal is the second daughter of Saul. And she fell in love with David in 1 Samuel 18 and verse 20. And to win her hand in marriage, David had to kill 100 Philistines. And you can remember that gory passage because he had to return with their foreskins as evidence of his success. Well, this was actually a ploy. Saul didn't really want 100 Philistines killed, but I'm sure he did. But the whole point was he would hope that going up against 100 Philistines, the one David would be executed. But David isn't, and in fact, he doesn't just kill 100 Philistines, he kills 200 Philistines and returns to Saul. But the Lord preserved David against Saul's hopes, and so Michal is given to David in marriage. But after she helped David escape from Saul, she's given to Palti, the son of Laish. And it isn't until 2 Samuel 3 that when David and Michal are reunited, and David calls her his wife. But in the time since then and now, something has changed, and there is no longer the affection to one another that they once both knew. From her vantage point, she sees David make a fool of himself. But David is joining the people in great celebration of what the Lord has done. Because verse 17 goes on to tell us of this celebration. And they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. The ark is placed in a tent that David has erected because at this point, as 1 Chronicles 16 tells us, the tabernacle was set up at Gibeah. And what happens once the ark is in place? David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord in renewed worship and in renewed fellowship with God and with all the people. Now, peace offerings involved a time of celebration for the worshippers as most of the animal is returned to the sacrificer so that they can eat it. And David would not have offered the animals personally. And 1 Chronicles 15, that's that parallel account to this, tells us that both Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, are present, as well as an extensive company of priests. But David is the leader of a nation, and so he donates the sacrificial animals. That's when the text says that David offered, it means that he gave. But he recognized the place of the priests in the act of the offerings. And he goes further than just blessing the people through the offerings. He blesses the people by giving them food to enjoy. And this is a wonderful scene of what he gives to them. Meat and raisins and bread. And what he's doing here is demonstrating the actions of a true covenant king. In stark reality to Saul, because Saul did none of this. Yet David is demonstrating that he will be indeed after the Lord's own heart. And so with this, the people return to their homes, rejoicing but also satisfied with the goodness of the Lord to them. And David returns home as well. But he returns home in similar mood to the people. But he's met by Michal in verse 20, and her mood is not like the king's, because look at what she says to him in that verse. As David returned to bless his household, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, "How the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself." Now Michal goes on, but her reaction may be sparked by nothing more than the fact that David has neither worn royal robes nor maintained his distance from common folk, especially the domestic servants. It doesn't say here that David was naked. We don't get that in this text. And so rather it suggests, because of who she is and how the text describes her as the daughter of Saul, there's a link back to how Saul would have handled this event. She despises David for his unroyal behavior. Michal had truly and genuinely once loved David. She had been attracted, though, to the dashing hero, the brave warrior of her dreams. But here before her now as king is the real David, who could lay aside all of the royal regalia and join with the whole nation in acclaiming and in celebrating the sovereignty of the Lord. See, for Michal, the reality is she doesn't understand this David, nor does she want to understand him. And in the marital infighting that follows, David shows that he could speak in as cutting a fashion as Michal. And he speaks of how she has misunderstood the situation. He states that his behavior was before the Lord, not before her, but before the Lord. So therefore, it was acceptable to him, and to him only, because it was genuine worship. David then brings up the fate of Saul and his dynasty, his family. And this is probably a sore point between himself and Michal. But the Lord had chosen him above Saul and above his household. And the Lord has chosen to appoint David as, he says, the Prince of Israel. And David goes on to say that he has been acting in a spirit of religious devotion toward his divine benefactor. And whether or not it agrees with Michal's notions of propriety, that does not concern him. David concludes, though, with his challenge to Michal by saying in verse 22, "I will make myself yet more contemptible than this, and I will be abased in your eyes. But by the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I shall be held in honor." Now, I don't think this is an example of how to settle disagreements within a marriage. But David here asserts that since his aim is to exalt the Lord, he will continue behaving in this fashion, even though he makes himself more contemptible, considered by Michal to be of lower social status. And though she will be shocked and she will disapprove, David is certain the female servants of whom Michal has spoken so disparagingly will exhibit greater religious perceptivity, recognizing his zeal for the Lord and respecting him for it. David's whole leading of the nation in worship is that they may worship well too. So as the leader goes, so goes the nation. And we don't know what Michal's response to his statement is, or to any of David's challenge to her, but we do hear from the Lord and what his judgment of her is. Because the closing verse of this chapter tells us, "And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death." Now, this verse doesn't tell us if Michal remains childless because David will no longer sleep with her, or because the Lord penalizes her by closing her womb. Perhaps both, with the Lord working through the one to affect the other. Michal's permanent estrangement from David is part of the withdrawal of divine favor from the household of Saul. There will be no son of David who is also a grandson of Saul, and so could unite the two dynasties. This is the everlasting punishment of Saul and his family. And so we leave what is a scene of mixed emotions. because there's joyous celebration of the worship of God by his people, but there's also the scene of disdain of Michal towards a king whom she believes has belittled his royal position. And from this evening we learn two things. And the first is celebrating God's goodness. Because the people in this account have celebrated the wonders of God in his faithfulness and goodness towards them. These are a people who have been held captive by the Philistines, who throughout the full reign of Saul have been warring against the Philistines and other enemies. And now, with this true covenant king, they are at peace. And so they are experiencing the goodness and faithfulness of God towards them. And they respond in what we could describe as a victory parade. Not a victory parade for David, but a victory parade for the Lord and his goodness. And David will write many psalms on this subject, and each one will allow the singer to express gratitude to God. Psalm 132 is a psalm written about this very day, but just a few psalms later in Psalm 138 and verses 1 to 3, we read David saying, I give you thanks, O Lord, with my whole heart. Before the gods I sing your praise. I bow down toward your holy temple and give thanks to your name for your steadfast love and your faithfulness. For you have exalted above all things your name and your word. On the day I called, you answered me. My strength of my soul you increased. I wonder, do we have such heart language as David has towards the Lord? Particularly as we see this wonderful celebration of the people led by David, celebrating God's goodness to them. I wonder likewise, do we give thanks to the Lord for his goodness and his faithfulness that continues towards us? I wonder, do we recall the wonderful works of the Lord? I would encourage you in your prayers to celebrate God and to celebrate his goodness. Give to God what is due his name and allow greater blessing as you draw closer to him in a fuller way. And maybe you're here this evening and your prayer life or maybe even your faith is maybe not feeling much like celebrating. Maybe you're feeling tired and weary. Maybe you're feeling that you're just not as close, like a charcoal on a fire. You've been pulled out and so the embers are cooling. I believe that when we celebrate the goodness of the Lord, we're taken beyond ourselves to look from his perspective what it means to know his goodness and his faithfulness, because when we look to the Lord, we will see just how good he has been, even though we may not fully recognize it or understand the situation that we're in. So as the people of old celebrated the goodness of God, can I encourage you to do the same? Count your blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. But the second thing from this passage is a warning of contempt towards God. This is a very serious warning here. And it comes from how Michal responds to the covenant king's worship of the covenant God. Her despising of heart is actually a witness that she does not love the Lord, as she has been commanded to love the Lord with all her heart, all her soul, all her strength, all her mind. She's not interested in this worship of God, otherwise she wouldn't have been standing looking down from a window. She would have been on the streets with the people. And so in her response to David, we're actually seeing her heart's true response to the Lord. And it is one of contempt. In many ways, she illustrates what Paul speaks of in Galatians chapter 6 and verses 7 and 8. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption. But the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. See, Michal's heart issue is that David was not lifting up himself as king, just as her father had done about himself.